think my cat's been very good at figuring out when I'm doing these. Because then she always needs me in my lap right then. Okie dokie. Pinocchio. Alright. Today I'm talking about The Power of the Dog, which is up for like 12 Oscars, I think, including Best Picture and Best Actor from Benedict Cumberbatch. The movie's about a guy named Phil and his brother. I'm terrible with names. His brother's name is George. Took a while. So, Phil, George, Rose, who's George's wife, and Peter, who's Rose's brother, I think, or maybe it was her cousin. My cat desperately needs to be in my lap right now. And there's like side characters and stuff, but it's basically just those four people throughout the whole movie. It takes place in Montana in 1925 as well. But Phil, he's a closet homosexual, but we don't know that right away. Spoilers, I guess. I don't know. It's a drama. It's not like a mystery or anything. But he's not really a good person, but he's also the main character. So it's kind of a... Oh, but this is a character study, like The Hand of the God Wanted to Be, or whatever it was called, Hand of God. And that it's actually a good character study because it has a consistent plot. And the weird thing is about this movie, actually, is that it's mostly just about little things, you know? Like, it feels like if there's any major events, they usually, like, happen off screen, almost. And it's just, like, about the little things that happen in between those. But they're very important things. It's very captivating the whole time. And that's the thing that's really surprised me, I think. Just because, like, just how much these characters, like, draw you in. And how much these little moments in their lives, like, become, like, a spectacle in their own right. But this simple story about, like, just... kind of a horrible person, but someone who can't be true to himself, so he kind of projects his inner rage out on the world around him. At least that's what I got out of it. It doesn't really like make those types of things completely clear. And it's kind of just about his life and the life of the people around him, specifically his brother and his wife, who he lives with, and Pete, who he seems to have some sort of attraction towards. Maybe it's as a mentor, or he's the mentor to Pete to some degree, but just the nature of the story makes me wonder if there's some sort of sexual attraction into it as well, but I don't know. But it doesn't completely make that clear. But it does make clear that Benedict Cumberbatch's character, Phil, is a closet homosexual. It's not like vague about that or anything. I thought overall the acting really stood out, like all around. Everyone did their part like amazingly, being that it's a character study, and Benedict Cumberbatch like played a role I've never seen him play before. It's just excellent in its own way. It's definitely not a nice person like Doctor Strange or even a good person like Sherlock Holmes, you know. He's definitely a very selfish character who doesn't really see people outside of himself very well, or very clearly anyway. And he's a very troubled person and doesn't seem to know how to deal with those troubles in like a normal, healthy way. And even though he's like a horrible person, you kind of feel bad for him by the end of the movie. It's a very complex character. That's another reason this story seems to work, you know, as a character study as opposed to Hand of God, which I just watched yesterday, so I'm going to keep thinking about it. But it is very good. Even though I said I was going to forget about Hand of God entirely, this is similar. Even though it's nothing to do with each other, you know. It's similar, just in that they're both character studies. I think Benedict Cumberbatch was amazing in the role he played in this. I think that he did a really good job playing a role he'd never played before. Oh, I already talked about him. Whatever. Kirsten Dunst was also really good as Rose. She developed a drinking problem just from having to deal with Phil for so long, and he's very devaluing and very critical of her. And so she develops a drinking problem, but it's like gets so severe, she's just like doing it all over the place. It's very strange, actually. I wish it kind of delved into her character more, but it doesn't really go that deep into everyone's character outside of Phil's. I mean, and even then it's kind of just showcasing certain things about him without really explaining much. But I enjoyed that, actually. You know, it leaves a lot up to interpretation, but while still making some things very clear, such as the events that happen around these people and like what happens in the end, especially. It was split into chapters, which I kind of appreciated too. Like there's like an intertitle of like 1, 2, 3, you know. And I just thought that was interesting in its own way. Or I don't know, it's just kind of neat. I guess it wasn't really that interesting. Just kind of a neat way of splitting it up and like showing you when great changes are made. It was almost like a series of short films in that way, because each chapter it's complete unto itself and just telling like one aspect of the story. Unlike Hand of God, which I'll never forget about now, thanks to this movie making me compare it to it. Unlike that movie, though, this movie was consistent throughout the whole movie. You know, the characters like did anything, nothing. Things didn't happen just for no reason. You know, I think that's the greatest problem with schlock like Hand of God. Just like things happen for no reason, apparently no reason. Okay, I'm gonna stop thinking about that movie again. But this one was great. Like I said, it was mostly about the little things, and that's the things that like made me mostly captivated. I don't know, I was captivated throughout the whole thing. It was hard to look away. I would say that the only problem is that like it kind of suffered from the second act doldrums, which is just what I call it when like second acts are about like second acts are like rising client. Second acts are called the rising action act, and that's because they're like a line that like leads up to the explosion at the end, basically, in its simplest terms. But like second act doldrums, I feel like the rising bar, it kind of like flatlines for a bit before going up again. You know, that's the doldrum part, when it just kind of flatlines, because it feels like nothing is really happening. Like but these scenes, they're happening anyway, that like the filmmaker obviously thought they were necessary, but it's like, because none of the story isn't really going anywhere, it kind of feels like it's just filler. But this happens a lot in a lot of second acts, so I wouldn't say it's just filler. Like, it's not like they just threw it in there just because they needed something to eat up runtime, because they needed this movie to be 2 hours long or whatever. Because it happens so much, it's not like a particularly uncommon thing. But yeah, outside of that, I would say like everything about this movie like really just captivated me and drew me in, like I said already. And especially the acting. The acting stood out more than anything else to me. Oh, and the soundtrack. The soundtrack was actually kind of interesting, just in that it would often like have these really slow-paced scenes that you might expect like kind of something lighthearted for the background, like ambiotic music that still like kind of like sets a scene, but instead it was like horror music. And it just made you like everything really tense, especially at bits that like didn't seem like they needed to have that tension, but it was like very interesting. And I think on a second viewing, those stylings would make a little more sense, just in how they used it and why. Being that I only watched this movie once, I can't really comment on that further, but it was a very interesting style and choices in music department, which I appreciate. That was a definite plus for the music. And the cinematography was really great, just like capturing these rolling hills and everything, and like really, like, again, it did a good job of making what might normally be considered mundane like really interesting and unique in its own way. And that's kind of the whole movie in its own way, like not just like the cinematography does that, the music does that, the acting does that, like everything is like this really mundane story that's told in such a unique and interesting way, it becomes a masterpiece. And that's what I would say about this movie. It really is. It's one of the few times I'm actually like, this movie deserves to have to have more nominations than anything else in the Oscars, you know. Or I don't know if it's 12. It might be 12, maybe 12 nominations, and more than any other in the Oscars. And that's rare when I say that. I agree. Like, yes. Because this was a really good movie, a very powerful film, and I'm still not entirely sure what the true motive of the movie was, you know what I mean? Like I could tell you what it's about, but I couldn't tell you like what the true theme of it was, you know what I mean? Like outside of just being about this horrible man and his relationship to others. I might need another viewing or two before I could like appropriately interpret the movie to some degree. But right now I'm just like, oh, that was good. I'm very interested. I'm very impressed by this film. I think that's all I have to say about the film, actually. So I can't think nothing else is jumping out at me. It was like I should mention blank, so I'll just give it a rating, and I kind of want to give it a 10. I kind of want to give it a 10 out of 10, even though it does have that second act doldrums, like I said, or whatever you want to call it. I call it the second act doldrums. But it's such a powerful movie, and it has such a great parts in it, great in its own way. I don't know. Nah, it's great, even if it's kind of a downer overall. It's one of those movies that's like really powerful. I'd almost compare it to like a Stanley Kubrick movie, just in that there's a lot of depth to it, while still being about like very, very simple things. Well, that's unlike Stanley Kubrick movies, which are always about very complex things. But this is about very simple things while still being while still having a lot of depth to it. And I guess it's like a Kubrick movie where there's as much going on under the surface as there is on the surface, or whatever you would call it, on a superficial nature of the film, you know. First viewing, you're like, oh, this is about just this guy and how horrible he is. On the second viewing, you might form another opinion, is what I'm saying. Like all Kubrick movies are like that, even the really bad ones at the beginning. But I think even with the second act doldrums, this movie is like good enough that, and also on a second viewing, maybe I'd see what I'm missing from those parts. I'd say it's a movie that deserves a second viewing too. So yeah, I think I'll stand by my 10 out of 10 for this movie, because I think it deserves it. It was an excellent film, and one that I think is deserving of having 12 Oscar nominations. I'm gonna say, I think this movie might last the test of time, but at this point, like any movie, like, you know, by next year, everyone's forgotten about it. Can't remember the name of the movie that won Best Picture last year. Okay, that was my review. Please like and subscribe, why not? Give me a thumbs up, just like I did for this movie.